Hey, welcome. Here we are for another, the 32nd or so of the Power Hours. Well, and some of you have been here for the entire time. Welcome to everybody. We're getting started here. We got about 52 people in the room at the moment. Some people joined late, which is fine. And today we're going to talk about zero to private, everything the CFI needs to do, and what the student should be checking along the way to be sure that things are getting done right. So I will tell you that there's a lot of mistakes happen in and around this. I was a pilot examiner for the FA for 11 years, and there's a lot of times when the students aren't ready, they're not eligible for the test, and so that's kind of bad, right? That's bad form, and then that's a bad day for everybody. So the idea here is, it seems to me that a lot of times what the flight instructors do is they just pick up some syllabus. They really don't even know what it is. They look at it and they go like, oh, if we just do these things, that should be fine. And they go to the student's logbook and they look in the back and there's these pre-printed endorsements, and they look at those and they sign those, and they have no idea whether they're right or not. They're just, well, if they're printed in there, must be true. And most of that is not true, and it may or may not be true. I found that most of the logbooks, the endorsements in the back are incomplete. And the ones that seem to have it the best, by the way, if you're looking for a logbook that seems to have those the best, or the Lime seems to have those pretty much nailed down, but I wouldn't even trust that. So anyway, what I plan to do is show you sort of everything that we need to do to get a student from zero, a person walks in the door until they're presenting themselves for a practical test for a private pilot, and the things that we as a flight instructor would have to do. And then so we're going to look at the regulatory requirements, what's required. Then we're going to look at the endorsements that are required. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll look at the testing requirements, what needs to be tested. So a lot of times CFIs will just pick up the ACS, which is the Airman Certification Standard. That's the testing document. And just say, well, if we do everything in there, we'll be done. And that may or may not be true. So I wouldn't use that. That's what's going to be tested, not necessarily what everything you have to teach. So there's a regulation requirement. So in our course at CFI Bootcamp, what we teach the students, our CFI applicants, we teach them what are the training requirements. That's the first thing. That's by regulation. Then what are the endorsements? That's in an advisory circular, an AC, which I'll show you. And then what's going to be tested. So each of our scenarios that we would pose to you would be asking those three questions, right? And so let's get a move on it here, because there's a bit of ground to cover. And then I have some things to show you. Today I'm going to show you a new course that we have out. Just a quick glance of it. It's not quite ready. It'll be ready here in a few days. It's called the Captain's Course, and it's for ex-airline. It's for people coming out of a 121 or 135 environment, need to reinstate their CFI, or sort of feel like they need some extra oomph to be able to do all this stuff again. So that'll be released here in another few days. We've got the thumbnail or the screenshot of what it's going to look like. And then I have also something interesting. I have a few products to show you. That's not just stuff that we have that I think is beneficial for this particular topic. And then I'm going to show you our daily schedule for our 7-day class, just so you can glance through it. And then what's his name there from American Flyers? You can screenshot all that and then show it to, and then I'll go up there and see that you're do it the same way. No, I'm kidding you. They've done it the same way for as long as I can remember. So keep doing what you're doing. Okay, so I just had to say, it's kind of fun, right? Okay, because we got a guy from Pompano up here who works at American Flyers, who's a competitor of ours, but we're all in good spirits, I mean, I don't have any real, we're such a small group of people who do this kind of training. It's very small. And so we either know one another or very close to know one another. Something happens, and so we're good with that. All right, so let's take a look. So I need to move some of this stuff out of the way here so I can see it all. And then we'll get going. All right. So what typically happens, like on a practical test, in a typical CFI check ride, one of the things that might be asked of you is something like, write out, and let me turn this annotation tool on too. I think that'd be helpful to have. Annotate. Let's put the spotlight on. By the way, we just finished our 3-day Google class. We do training for Google's X Lab, and we do their Part 107 training, which is the remote pilot thing. So I rewrote all that stuff and did that over the last 3 days, and so now they'll be ready to take their their Part 107 remote pilot exam. So that's another course that's coming too, by the way. But I couldn't record it because I can't show people who work in the X Lab or Google. I can't, it wouldn't be fair. So I'm just going to do that separately. But the content's all there. So if you're interested in becoming a remote pilot, we're going to get there at some point. Probably have something on that here. That'd be a nice power hour thing about how to do. Okay, anyway, on topic. So let's solve a typical Checkride scenario. So let's say write out all the training requirements and endorsements needed for a person to start from 0 hours to be eligible for a private pilot airplane single engine land practical test. And practical test is a Checkride. So and so we know it is a Checkride, but the government and FAA agency and DPs know it as a practical test. That's what it's called. So that's what we're going to do. So these kinds of scenarios like that and others are part of our online course's 7-day class. So we go through all that because that's tricky, can be real tricky, right? And so that's and you're sure to get several of those on the practical test. So if you're looking to take a test or reinstate, that's going to be part of it. So we do things like for example, take a person from private pilot glider into private pilot airplane single engine land. And so what are the training requirements, the regulatory requirements? What are the endorsements? And then what are the testing requirements? And so you'll see those are different. And in fact, I guess just to cap that off, that person who's a glider pilot is not subject to the student pilot regulations at all. So the only way you have to solo them under an entirely different regulation, and it has no restrictions. So it's interesting. So anyways, things like that we go through. All right, now in what we're going to go through, there can be some variance in the endorsements we're going to see because there are options that may or may not be used. For example, there's an endorsement for the student pilots that allow them to fly into or land at the primary airport in Class B airspace. And if that's not where you are, so you may not need that. But if you're in Tampa, for example, at Tampa International, and you're a flight school there, that is right in the middle of Class B, and you're going to need it there. So there'll be some variance in how you maneuver through, and we'll look at those kind of as we go. So the first thing we need to look at is eligibility. So they got to be 16 years old, and we got to get them a student pilot certificate. And so that's the first thing. And they also need a third-class medical, and they could use basic med if they had a medical within the previous 10 years, and then they got basic med. They could do that, but typically it's not the case. You're going to start off with a fresh, brand new face who's never sat a medical before, and so then it's going to be a third-class medical is the minimum. Now, in order to issue this student pilot certificate, which, by the way, you issue now as a flight instructor, you're issuing the student pilot certificate. Back in the day, not too long ago even, 4 or 5 years ago, the medical examiner, the AME, issued the student pilot certificate along with the third-class medical. That's no longer the case because, frankly, they were pretty poor at it. What I mean by it is determining the eligibility, not the age. That's pretty easy. But they couldn't seem to manage to test out the English language capability. And so now it's incumbent upon CFIs to test the English language to ensure the person speaks at ICAO level 4. So ICAO is International Civil Aviation Organization level 4. Most countries require an English language test, a practical test, and a written test. And then you get like in England, I have English certificates. It's called an RT license, radio telephony license. And it's quite complicated. There's a lot, the exact phraseology, and then there's an engagement with to make sure you're speaking at least ICAO level 4. Now, the way you know that they're speaking at ICAO level 4 is there's an advisory circular, which I'll just pull up briefly for you. So I'll get this stuff out the way. It's this one. So this is AC 006B, and it goes through how to do it. So basically it says that you need to have them read something and then write a summary of what it says. That's the read-write part. And then after that, you have a conversation about that. And then what you need to do is compare the way they speak there's a website in here, which they give you. What is this? This is not the right thing. This is the wrong AC. That's not good. I'll pull up the other one in a second. It's the English language capability. But there's a website in there which you click onto, and it has people speaking at various ICAO levels. And so what that means is that you can compare then their syntax and their structure and that with the way that is. And most CFIs aren't doing that, by the way. So that's one problem. And most CFIs don't even know that's even a requirement. So, and then the AC goes on to say that the English language should be tested at every phase of the training, so continuously. For a flight review, anything, you're supposed to be testing that. Okay, so there's that. So you know that. We're not going to go through exactly how to do it, but just to know it's there, and I'll bring up the AC at the end. I put up the wrong one by mistake there. Okay, so the CFI, number one, the CFI who's going to solo the student has to administer a knowledge test covering the relevant sections of Part 61. That's the how to get your certificate. Part 91, the general operating rules, the airspace and operating procedures at the airport where the solo will take place, and the operating characteristics and limitations of the airplane to be used. And that test can be any length. And it says a knowledge test, and knowledge test by FAA means either a written test that's on paper or online. Either one of those will do. And you have to administer it, and you have to grade it, and you have to resolve all the correct answers. So the CFI can't use a knowledge test that's been administered by somebody else or the school. It's got to be administered by the CFI. And then it can be whatever you want. But you can imagine, like in Part 91, you don't need to talk about things like carrying passengers for hire. You don't need to talk about hemispheric cruising, the cruising altitudes of various headings, because that's not in the solo. And on the airspace, you only need to consider the airspace where the airport you're going to solo is and the operating procedures at that airport. So at Opa-locka Airport, we have quite a complicated taxi structure. And so there would be quite a few questions, I would imagine, that we would give to our students here. So anyway, that's there. And then the instructor has to administer a test and resolve the incorrect answers. That regulation, I'll step through these with the real regulation here in a minute, is 61.87b. And you'll get this outline, by the way. We'll send it to you, so don't worry about that. And then you need to endorse there's an endorsement that is recommended in this AC, which I do have, 6165 hotel, which hereafter I'm just going to call it the AC, right? That's an AC that has what to do. It has, here's what you do, and here's the sample endorsements to use, and they're correct. There are some limitations and problems with that AC, but when we will discuss that at a different time, but it's in the AC, and I'll show you that in a second. And then the student has to do what we call in CFI Bootcamp the 15 things. You got to do the 15 things. And these are specific flight maneuvers. You got to do them to proficiency. It's called pre-flight training. And it's under regulation 6187 Charlie, which I'll show you. So you can imagine those things are like pre-flight preparation, pre-flight engine starting, run up, takeoffs, landings, this sort of thing. So there's that. And just in a second, when I just get to this end part right here, I'll pull up the AC and the regulations so we go through it. And then you give an endorsement for that. So you get it. So there's another in that AC. There's another endorsement. Say that was done, and finally there's an endorsement for solo flight that's good for 90 days. So 6187 November. Everybody at CFI should have that tattooed right on their forehead, probably. 6187 November. It's good for 90 days. All right. So now let's go to the regulation and take a look at that, so we can see that what I've told you is correct. So let me bring that up here. I'm going to show that on iPad. So move things out the way again. All right, let's do another share here. This will be of the FAR. I know that part is boring, but we'll explain it, and that won't be boring. Okay. All right, so you should see now the the FAR. We'll go down here to part 61. 61 is here, and we'll go to 6180 section. It's subpart C. As A, B, and here comes C, student pilots. So this is the eligibility, which we talked about. And then these are the pre-solo requirements. So 6187B, this is the requirement for a knowledge test here. And it goes over what I said. And this is the pre-solo flight training, which says they have to have the 15 things. And so we look down through and see what those 15 things are. They're right here, the 15 things. So they have to be found proficient in these areas. So whatever these are, you can read them off or look at them later. And so as a CFI, what you should be thinking about is making sure that these exact words occur in the student's logbook. Many times, one of the fun things we do in the class is we have you go through your logbook, audit it, and see that you did all the 15 things. And a lot of times you'll see there are things missing. And maybe they were done, but they're not recorded properly. And you go like, wow, that's kind of bad, right? Bad form, right? And then so that's what we'd have to do. And then if you keep the rest of it applies then to gliders and multi-engine airplanes. It's a long way down the list before we get to the next thing to do. It's under November. So we'll go down that far. So this is the regulation 627 November that points to the idea that the student has to have an endorsement good for 90 days in their logbook to solo. And this would be the driving regulation. If you want to solo them at night, which I wouldn't recommend, you would look at this regulation, do these things, and then give that endorsement. And then finally, if they need more than 90 days to complete all the training, then you can give them an updated endorsement, and that endorsement would be 6187 Papa, this one. Now let's go to the AC so we can kind of see how that looks like, okay? So I'm going to bring that share up, and I'll do something else. So here we go. Advisory circular. All right, so this is the AC. It was last updated right here, 8/28/18, so fairly recent. There's still a few trouble areas with it, you know, the areas that I have trouble with. But anyway, that aren't exactly right. But these areas are mostly right. So I think you can hang your hat on this. Before, and about 4 years ago, this was terrible. This thing was awful. So anyway, let's have a look. So this is divided up into two parts. The first part of the AC is text, and it basically says if you want to do something, read this first, and then after that we'll show you the endorsements. So the endorsements are in the appendix. So if I were to go to the student pilot section here, student pilot certification, or pre-solo requirements and privileges, if I click that, then it tells us in words what to do, right? And it says, make sure you do this. Like there's the knowledge test, there's the flight training. And then there's the 90-day one, there's a solo at night, and there's various things. So, okay, so that helps us make sure that we have done all the things that are required, like a checklist, right? And then we can look at the actual endorsements in the appendix, which are back here at the very end. Okay, so this is the appendix with the sample endorsements. So by the way, there's the two most neglected endorsements are A1 and A2. A1 is required for every single practical test that you're ever going to take. You have to have this endorsement no matter what, every single time. And it's missing in a lot of places. And the AC is good mostly about saying, don't forget A1 and A2 or A1, but in some places it falls short, and you have to just know this. So this says that A1 says that you're prepared for the practical test, that you have had training within 2 calendar months. And A2 may or may not be required depending on what you're doing. In this case, it will be. Review the deficiencies identified on the knowledge test. That's by logbook endorsement. So you got to look at the student's knowledge test for private pilot, and you have to endorse that you've resolved all the deficiencies. So as we look down through, we can now see there are several endorsements that could pertain to student pilots in here. And by the way, one of the things we teach you at CFI Bootcamp is to say, instead of just reading the regulation, go right to the AC and see what you want to do, because this always points back by regulation to where the regulation is. So it's kind of like working the problem backwards, right? You say, I think I would like to solo someone, or I want to send someone on a flight to another airport in class B or whatever it would be. You can just look at that and you see the regulation right there, and you go back, see the regulatory requirements, see that you met it, then you could give the endorsement. So that's not a bad way to do it. But in particular, these are the endorsements. So let's pop these and take a look. So here's the pre-solo aeronautical knowledge test. You need this endorsement. This, by the way, is not required by regulation. It's an advisor. It's what I also don't like about the AC. They don't make it clear as to what regulation is required by law and what's just recommended. This is a recommended regulation. So I certify that whoever has satisfactorily completed the pre-solo knowledge test 6187B for the Cessna 172 aircraft. And then you would date it, sign it, put your CFI certificate number here, and expiration. And then for pre-solo flight training, these are the 15 things. Once you've done that and they're found proficient, this is the endorsement. You would say that I have done those things. And finally, you would give this one for the first 90 days, solo flight for the first 90-day period. And then if you needed to go back and update the endorsement for additional 90-day periods, then you would give this one, 6187 Papa, this one. All right, so that gets us to where now we have a student who's soloed. We got his medical or her medical certificate. We have their student pilot certificate. We haven't talked about TSA because that's not part of the FAA, so we won't talk about that. But anyway, now we've done the training, we've done the knowledge test, we've graded it, and then we've done the 15 things, and then we've given the endorsement for their first solo flight, and that's good for 90 days. The next thing we would typically do is cross-country training, or it could be such at this point that the student or you may decide, I would like you to go to another airport, so you can practice. And so you might say, I'm going to go send you to, from here, we would say, where we say to go, like North Perry Airport, 8 miles away. So then you can give this endorsement once you read what the training requirements are. You have to fly with them there and back over the route, takeoffs, landings at the other airports, so on. And you can give them this one and they can go there as many times as they want. That's within 25 nautical miles. So you could have many of those, depending on where you live. You could have many airports that are within 25 miles. And so that's why I say these endorsements can vary, or you can never give this. You may never need to give this. So we have that. The next one we have to do then is we have to get the student ready for solo cross-country flight. And so that regulation is 6193, C1 and 2. And that's we call the 12 things. So I'll go back to the regulation here and we'll look at the 12 things that need to be done. There it is. All right, 6193, which is down here. And the 12 things are going to be down here. I'll show them to you. Here they are. So under Echo here, turn the spotlight on so we can see a little bit better. Echo. Maneuvers and procedures for cross-country flights in a single-engine airplane. These are the things. So you can see in general that they make a bit of sense, like use of aeronautical charts for VFR navigation using pilotage, dead reckoning, and the aid of a magnetic compass, use of performance charts, this sort of thing. But there's some things in here that you go like, well, I didn't realize that would even be in there, right? So let's take a look. I'll point out a few important things to you. Now remember, the guy from up in Pompano, take notes, right? So here's this. Here's an interesting one. 8. If you noticed, when you look at these regulations again on your own, for the solo flight, it doesn't say anything about understanding the equipment or using a radio in your airplane. You don't have to know how to use the radio. You don't have to you can just be instructed on what equipment to use in the airplane, and that's the end of it. So that's not a requirement. But for cross-country training, look at this. It says procedures for operating the instruments and equipment installed in the aircraft being flown, including recognition and use of proper operational procedures and indications. So this means that whatever's installed in the airplane, the student now has to be able to use, whether it's an autopilot, whether it's a TCAS system, whatever it is, the student has to understand how to turn it on, how to turn it off, what the indications are. You didn't have that requirement for solo. The other one, which is another interesting one, is this one, climbs at best angle and best rate. So that's now required in the cross-country side. And by the way, I'm going to throw in my 40 cents worth of stuff for you CFIs who are currently teaching, is I do not teach my students to climb at best rate of climb. That's a specialty, a special airspeed. Also, best angle is a special airspeed. My students are going to climb with the cowling touching the horizon. That's about 80 knots in a Cessna 172. And the reason for that is I want them to see what's in front of them. I want them to see if they're, like we have Palo Alto, there's a lot of birds. Here we have a lot of these black buzzards that fly around in South Florida. And there are people making mistakes if it's a training airplane, the pattern all the time. So I want them to be able to see those things and not care about the extra 50 feet per minute you're going to get by having chosen that speed relative to best rate. Now, when the time comes and you need to use the speed, then I'm going to teach you to do it and when to use it, right? And any other time in climb, we're going to use cruise climb. So we can get a maximum ground speed and then we'll not worry about our rate of climb unless we have to get up over terrain, right? Or something like that. So that's my 14 cents on it. So climbs at best angle and best rate. Also, you have the other thing you have to do is you have to take off and landing here. You have takeoffs and landing, including short field and soft field. So now you have to do short field, soft field. You didn't have to do that for soloing a student. So that is because if the student has to go to another airport unplanned and it's shorter than they're kind of used to, or maybe it's an emergency, or they have to land off field or land at a grass field or gravel field, whatever it is, they've got some chance of pulling that off. And last thing they do is control and maneuvering solely by reference to flight instruments, including all those things. So they have to be proficient basically under the hood. So that's the other thing. And by the way, you notice in this section here, it doesn't say instrument training. It does not use the word instrument training. If it said instrument training, like it says in the commercial regulations, 10 hours of instrument training, you couldn't do that. You wouldn't be allowed to do that because then you need to be an instrument flight instructor. But because this says control maneuvering solely by reference to flight instruments, you can do this as a plain vanilla CFI. You don't have to have a double I to do this. But again, if you were the commercial pilot where you require 10 hours of instrument training, you as a CFI cannot do that unless you have an instrument rating on your CFI. All right, so that's what, now let's go back to the endorsements so we can see what that looks like. So here's for the initial cross-country flight. So it says that that person has received the required cross-country training and find them that they've met the applicable regulations to make proficient solo flights, cross-country flights in a Cessna 172 aircraft. And it says aircraft category, it's airplane, right? So you would give them this one to certify that the training was done. This does not enable, this endorsement doesn't enable the student to be able to do anything yet. It just says the training has been completed, right? And the next thing then is, this one is what you would give if you wanted to send them on a cross-country flight on their own, right? And so this is a very special regulation. Why is it special? Because any flight instructor can give this this endorsement without never even knowing the student, never flown with them one day in their life. This is one of the few. There's only a few. One is here, and there's some ground instructor things that you can do, but the rest of it, in terms of flying, this is the only area that you as a flight instructor don't have to know the student. This is used quite commonly at very large flight schools. For example, at Transpac, which is now AeroGuard in Phoenix, they're a big factory, right? So 400 Chinese students at a time, 80 flight instructors, about 65 airplanes. Excuse me. So what happens is the school wants to have the factory running. So we need to get these pilots turned out. The last thing they want is for that flight instructor, a flight instructor, to sit down with the student, review the cross-country planning, check the weather, and all that while they could be flying with another student. So what they do is they have a duty CFI who is on board to do that. And so they review all that. They dispatch it out and they give the endorsement, and they don't know the student from Adam, usually. So that's what this is. And so you have to have reviewed the cross-country planning of whoever it is and find it to be correct. And then you have to check the weather and make sure they can do it under VFR, and you give them this endorsement. This is a one-time endorsement. It expires right after use. And it's good only under the known conditions, whatever that means to you. And you can put whatever limitations that you want down there on that. Right. Now, there's a special, another semi-special regulation. This isn't used very often. But as long as the cross-country flight training has been completed and certified, then you can have a student go more than 25 nautical miles, but less than 50. So back in Palo Alto, there's an airport called Byron Airport, and also the Byron Airport and Tracy Airport. They're about 36 miles away. We have one here in South Florida from Opa-locka. It's called Dade Collier. Yeah, it's AeroGuard, by the way, Ben. Yeah, the big school that has the Chinese students. So that's about 35 miles. So if we wanted to, we could give the student, if they finish the cross-country training, we can give them this endorsement, which allows them to go repeatedly to that airport, 50 nautical miles. Now, again, what you have to do it is located in the regulation. So I don't want to, there's not enough time for me to spend to go through every single thing we'd have to do. That's what we do in the course, but that's not what I have time to do. So, yeah. let's see. Also be very careful about using anybody's app. I noticed a thing for SAFE does have a good capture of the endorsements. That's correct. And I trust SAFE because they're an organization that represents us. But don't be picking up sheets of paper off someone's desk or go to some internet Google search and get endorsements for there. Get them right from here. But again, the SAFE app is pretty good. And by the way, we're featured in that app in the thing. This way you'll see the whole deal in there. So anyway, there's that. Someone knows about SAFE. That's good. All right. Now, so there's that one. And this would be an endorsement. Again, if you wanted to solo someone in Class B airspace, let them solo in Class B airspace. And this next one is, yeah, there's a link to, yes, correct. Gary Palmer says there's a link to the AC, which is good. Yeah. So just be sure. And this is if you want them to land at the primary airport. So these are possibilities. You know, there's no guarantee that you use that. It just depends. All right, so now going on from that. So now what we should have accomplished, if we go back to the outline, let's do that here. Let's take a look at that. Still need to move things out the way. Okay, so we've done these things. We left off here with about right, let me get the annotations going here. Spotlight, sorry, right here. We left with talking about it right here, the 15 things. We did that. We endorsed them for solo flight, good for 90 days. We did that. Then we gave the possibilities, like the other airport, maybe they have that. Cross-country training, did that. We endorsed the cross-country has been completed. And then if they wanted to actually make a cross-country flight, reviewed the pre-flight planning and the weather and let them go under the known conditions. And we said that endorsement could be given by anybody. That's a CFI. So that's this one. And we endorse each cross-country flight thereafter. So it means that there's not a way for us to let a student go more than 50 miles unless the only way to do that is on a one-time endorsement where the instructor has reviewed the cross-country planning and the weather for each time. So that's where we are with that. So that you would have a number of those, and I can't tell you, how many. So the idea on the Checkride would be, let me see, just to see that what you have, and then we'd say, okay, well, I see that you how many cross-country flights do you think it would take? Well, they have to have 5 hours across country. So you'd say, I don't know, 2 or 3 flights, 5, whatever you want to put down. I think the idea is that you know what to do to authorize someone for cross country. And again, a lot of the CFI programs I see, and I heard this one statement, which I thought was crazy on Reddit. And it was, all you really need to do is read a bunch of books and do about 3 hours of flight training from the right seat, and you can pass your CFI test. That is about as not true as I've ever heard. The only way you're going to pass a flight test that way is if you know exactly what's going to be on the test. And then when you get done with the test, what are you? Less than. That's what you are. You're not a CFI. You're just someone who has a certificate that you really didn't earn. And so we want to really make sure that you're operational. And when you get done, that you can take a person from 0 to hero and be confident in that. And make sure you don't miss anything. That's the main thing. So you don't want to be caught out by that. All right, so there's this. Now we're going to look then at the specific requirements for the private pilot. So and then we'll be kind of getting close to the end of that. But let's look at the regulation that talks about private pilots and what we have to do. So I'll bring up that as a new share. This one, it's going to be on iPad again. And I'll have you run your eye down through it here in just a second. So we're going to leave the student pilot section and go into the private pilot section. So there's a requirement for aeronautical knowledge. And when I teach this class in the 7-day class or the online class, either one, I make it very clear to you that in this very beginning section, there's the word or, and or is not in the next section. So this is an important thing to look out. So let's have a look and see what this says. It says a person who's applying for a private pilot certificate must, that means you have to, receive and log ground training from an authorized instructor, there's the or complete a home study course on the aeronautical knowledge areas of this part down here. So this part down here can be done by a CFI or it can be done by a home study course. So these are the kind of things that are in there. So you can sort of just look just in general and see what's there. I don't think we have to go through them. So that can be done. And by the way, there's an endorsement in the AC that we'll look at that is if they've chosen the home study course, then you're not going to give the endorsement that's in the private pilot section of the AC. You're going to give a different one. So I'll show you that in a second. So these are the things. And then the next section is the flight proficiency. This is what they have to be proficient in. And I'll bring your attention, there's no or up here. So a person who applies for a private pilot certificate has to receive and log ground, and that's the ground word, and flight training from an authorized instructor on these areas. So you got to log ground training around these areas. I find that most students don't have ground training logged around these areas. Or I've got it, and in fact, I find they don't have ground instruction logged at all. So this is incumbent. It's right here in the regulation. Must receive. There's no or. There's no home study course here. This has got to be done by you, and you have to endorse these things. Let's say and so what we do in CFI Bootcamp is we have these ground training logs we provide you, and they're part of the stuff you get, which I'll show you in a second. So you can see what the nature of it is, and then you can see, then you can know. It's really easy to see, and for the examiner to know that you've covered all the regulatory requirements. All right, then there's the experience. It's the last part, the experience requirement. This is how many hours of this and how many hours of that do I need, and what do I need for this? And so here it is. For airplane single engine land, you need at least 40 hours of flight time. That includes 20 hours of flight training. That's dual instruction from an authorized instructor, and 10 hours of solo. That's 30, right? So where's the other 10 or whatever it is? It's whatever you want it to be as the CFI. And here's on the training side, has to have at least 3 hours of cross-country flight training in a single engine airplane. Then you have to fly at night here. This is night training requirements, 3 hours of that with one cross-country flight of over 100 nautical miles total distance. So it could be like 51 miles out and 51 miles back is fine. 10 takeoffs and landings to a full stop in each airport, each landing involving a flight in the traffic pattern. The reason that's there is kind of funny because there are big long runways, like we got Dade Collier here, which is more than 10,000 feet long. So you could take off, land, take off again, land, do about 5, and then taxi back and do 5 more. But they want each flight to be in the traffic pattern, of course. So I actually had to write that in there, which I think is pretty funny. And then you need 3 hours of flight training on the sole reference to the flight instruments. And again, you can do that now. And finally, for the dual side, 3 hours of flight training with an authorized instructor within 2 months preceding the day of the practical test. And then on the 10 hours of solo time, here's where it says you need the 5 hours of solo. This is cross-country solo time. 5 hours has to be cross-country time. And you need one of those flights has to be, now this is funny because the regulation is wrong here. There's been a legal interpretation, which is good, but it's pretty funny because the FAA likes to hold you right to the letter of the law, right? Because this is law, but it's wrong, right? Well, it's not wrong. It's just you're going to be unable to meet this thing. I want to point it out to you. One solo cross-country flight of 150 nautical miles total distance with full stop landings at 3 points. And one segment of that has to be a straight line distance of more than 50 miles between takeoffs and landings. This is one of the few places in the regulation that the cross-country flight has to be a nonstop journey of more than 50 between takeoff and landing points. But the funny part is this. It says one solo cross-country flight. It doesn't say of at least. It says 150. That means it has to be exactly 150 nautical miles, according to this regulation. 151 doesn't count. Anything over exactly 150 wouldn't count. And all the other regulations say of at least. And so the interpretation was we meant to say at least. So they had a little egg on their face when they interpreted that one. So that's the now let's go to the AC, and then we'll look at the that. So the AC again is here, and I'll need to share that with you. This one. And we'll go now we'll go to the private pilot section, which now you can see. Go down here. Sport pilot, recreational pilots, and private pilots coming soon here. And here, that's commercial. Here are the private pilots. So this one, we'll spotlight again, maybe. This is to take the aeronautical knowledge test. And so you would give that. And by the way, this is also says you've done the aeronautical knowledge part, those things that you could either do by home study, or you could do it by giving the instruction. So you don't give this if you haven't given this instruction. If you've used the home study course, use something else. I'll show you in a second. And then this is the flight proficiency side. So this says, and also notice what it says. It does point you to A1 and A2, those endorsements in the beginning. So it says, be sure you give those too. And it says, I certify that whoever has received the required training in accordance with 6107 and 109 found they've determined they're prepared for the private pilot airplane single engine land practical test. That's the only 2 endorsements. Now, in order to find the home study one, you've got to go to additional endorsements way down in the AC. So let's cruise way down in the AC. These should be close to here. It's here. A82 is review of the home study curriculums. This is the one you would give in lieu of that one because you didn't give the instruction. I certify that I reviewed the home study curriculum of whoever it is, and I've determined that is prepared for the knowledge test. All right, so that's what you would do there. So that's the, and with that, and a completed IACRA application, the student would be ready with all those endorsements for the private pilot practical test. Now, one of the things that we have is this thing. This is the ultimate guide to endorsements. So it's a little different than the AC because I'll show you what it does. This is in, if you're at one of our, you have our online course or you are in our 7-day class, you get this stuff anyway, but have a look at the private pilot certification. So this is by checklist. It tells you what to do. I can zoom out here a second so you can see it a bit better. Notice there are little boxes to tick there. The endorsements are here as well. But what's interesting is here's the ground training logs. So this is the ground training, that's 61-105 if you gave it. And then the 61-107, where people don't, again, most people don't have this. This is the ground training centered around that. So these are all by specific action as opposed to student pilots, private pilots. It's by specific action. So a little easier to use in some ways. The other thing we have, which I think is very cool for you, and this is, by the way, instructions about soloing students and so on. The other one is this one. It's we call the Red Book. This is a very cool book because, well, number one, I wrote it. That's really good. But that's endorsement and scenarios. So the problem you have in CFI training is that you can say, okay, let me give myself a scenario. How I'm going to solo a student. How I'm going to do this. And you may then you're going to give yourself the answer too, right? And your answer may be wrong. So what this book does is it gives you about 24 examples of things that you're going to do, like student pilots. If you click that, you go to the student pilot section, which is here, and it gives you a specific scenario. What are the specific requirements and endorsements for a student pilot to solo an airplane? And then it gives you in text what the answer is right here. And then it also gives you a flow chart as to take you through each of the regulations and how it walks you through the regulations. So this allows you to test yourself, and then if you got it wrong, to see where you sort of faltered, right? So we use this in training as well. And we've created all this kind of custom content. Okay, now let's look at one other thing here. This is a daily schedule. So this is like a live class that we would do either streaming or in person. This was from the last class, February. So let me show you the idea of what's in there. So this is like a class schedule, day one. So we cover, these aren't lecture, by the way. This is some of it's lecture, but some of it's putting it together. So for example, for the fundamentals of instruction, we have mind maps for every chapter, how things relate to one another. So it's not just me puking out information to you. You actually see the relationships between the topics. The second day, we talk about student pilots, work group with scenarios. We talk more about the fundamentals of instructing, more teaching practice then. And then this day, we do a lot of regulation work with, again, we do cover recreational as well as sport, cover all the commercial, everything there is to cover. And we use this AC a lot, as you can see it's mentioned here. And then on this day, we talk about teaching aerodynamics. We do the fundamentals of instructing. We do airspace. And this day is all cross-country flight planning. A lot of stuff comes out of that, along with runway incursion. The sixth day, we do last FOI, the flight instructor regulations, sport pilot, more aerodynamics. And then the very last day is the day that we put things that we can't figure out where they go. Like there's no real good place to put them. So night, aircraft systems, go over typical Checkride briefs, lunch, and then some questions and answers. That's sort of the way that goes. Let me see if I want to do one more thing here. Let me go get this AC that I wanted to show you, so you can say that it's real. Oops, it's in the way again. Give me 1 second. Let me get this cleaned up here. The toolbar goes of Zoom goes over everything, and so it becomes a bit of a problem. So, all right. It will come up in 1 second here. So I want to get to the right AC. So I'm giving you the whole thing here. Okay, so let me share this with you. This is our product called CFI Essentials that I'm getting it from. Let me just share the whole thing with you. So you can see kind of everything here. All right, so it's organized like this in 4 folders. This is all of our stuff. So that's all the things that we give you, our custom authored stuff. And these are the FAA material. And so I'm going to go to the ACs over here. And these are all the ACs that are needed for certification. And we look down here, you see the English language one is here, this one. And this is that AC. So this is the purpose of the AC, English language, and there's a website in here. So if I go down here a bit farther, so this tells you all the things you have to evaluate, but there's a website, which we'll get there in a second. Close. There it is, right here, this one. Right here, it's under 6.2. It's this website, and that's where you can go get all the sample people speaking at different ICAO levels. So that's in it. So if you just have the AC, though, you don't really, I just want to point out that it's in there so that you know where it's at. And let me do this bit right here. I'll do the share back to this for a second so you can make sure you get everything right. Move the chat over. I'll answer chat questions here in just a second if there are any. I have a few housekeeping things to go over, then we'll recap, and I'm going to have Nicholas show the just a screenshot there in a minute of the captain's course. So let me get started. Let's get down to business. Give you one more night to get this. We've had a million nights just like this. So let's get down to business. So we're going to have some other power hours coming up. I want to tell you that Hobie Tomlinson will be with us next week. You really won't want to miss this. Tell all your friends, in particular on this one, because I'm a big fan of this fellow. He knows more about flying twin-engine airplanes pistons than anybody in the entire world, I'm sure. He's been a pilot examiner 42 years. He still teaches out of Burlington, Vermont. And he's assembled a mass of information about stuff that we don't teach anymore. He's going to teach you about very specific things about something called the drag demonstration, about VMC that really aren't put to words anymore. And I think he's fascinating to listen to. So be sure to do that. On the 20th, we're going to either have Gary Reeves back, which is going to be CFI of the Year, and talk about it's Gary Reeves, GPS. He calls himself Guy in the Pink Shirt. Who's makes $250,000 a year teaching people how to fly in advanced avionics airplanes, and he's the IFR master. So we're gonna have one of those either be or it will be this one. If you're looking to get wings credit, you can't get wings credit for this particular segment, the live segment. You can only get credit for the previous ones, and we stream those. And so, for example, they'll be streamed 1 hour before this, and you'll get an email. You'll click on these and see what that's about. If you miss these power hours, we only broadcast the live one, and we broadcast them sort of in sequence in the hour before. The only way to get them all is to be in the membership site. And so that's pretty cheap. It's like $9 for the advanced level here. We give you the basic price for that. So you can click on that, see what's in there. There's also 2 videos of signal subjects that come out per week. And those are kind of interesting. One is like aircraft antennas, for example, identifies all the antennas on the airplane and what they do. So there's little short subjects like that. And there's also the Jekyll Island videos in there, which are tribal knowledge, we call it. It's deep dives into a big round table of conversations that we had about various types of things. Some of that information is not printed anymore either. So that's kind of good to have. And there's an area where you can chat to other people. These are the upcoming classes. If you're interested in the class, the March class, there is a March class. It's not here, but it's March the 15th. It's in Opelika. There's just a seat, I think, left. It's pretty much full. There's some live stream spots left. And if you're looking to do a class in Palo Alto, we're trying to do this one, the 19th to 25th, as long as Santa Clara County will let us. And then we'll do the double I classes will be March 22nd, 24th in Opelika. And the right after this class, 26th, 29th will be there. Now I want to let Nicholas screen share just to give you a quick shot of what this looks like. So are you there?
Yeah, and then Mike, we can also give them a sneak peek. We can give them a sneak peek of the Teach Brief Fly whiteboard.
Yeah. Oh, okay. We can give you a sneak peek. Okay, of Teach Brief Fly too. That'd be great. Let's take a look at that and see. So I'll stop sharing so you can share. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. Let's get on it. So this is the captain's course. So it's laid out like this, and it will be all those things that, like teaching aerodynamics, that you probably forgot, and all these sorts of things, and you can sort of get an idea of what's in there. And there are lectures, there are video, of course, and there's downloads, and you can also download just the MP3 file if you want, so you can listen to it in your car. Sometimes you know the content already. It's just kind of nice to have around. So that's kind of cool. Okay.
And then here's the.
I first want to start out by.
Oh, here's the Teach Brief Fly. This is the pre-flight briefings that you can see we have little comment things at the top, that little square. We're telling the people who are formatting it to change something. And I'll answer your questions here in just 1 second. Yeah, so this is what's going to be in. This is what you would draw on the board to give that particular lesson, pre-flight briefing. Yeah, so that segment should be coming out of formatting here in another few days' time. So there's that. Is that it there?
That's all I got.
Okay, so let me go back. So stop sharing and I'll put up the main share again. Goody. All right, let's go back to here. So let's just quickly, I want to go through the chat here because there are a few questions and make sure that we covered those. Here it is. I'll go from the bottom up here real quick. So it says, can you get a CFII without having a CFI? Yes, you can. If so, with limitations, you can only give instrument instruction. You can't do anything else. So that's all you could do. And you can also give the 10 hours of training and instrument training required for the commercial pilot certificate. It'd be pretty limited. But yes, you can do it as an initial. You can do MEI as an initial if you want, or CFII, or the regular airplane single engine side. You can do either one of those as an initial. And then great on the SAFE app. See if there's anybody else has any questions here real quick. Writing as fast as I can for my Pompano Beach newfound friend. So we'll connect at some point. That'll be fun. I'd like to meet you. I'll come up there one of these days and we'll say hi. That'd be fun. Okay. So anyway, is that all we got? Let me just make sure I've got everything off the table. I don't like leaving anything hanging. That's for sure. And then you already know what's going to be happening next week. Talked about that. And we've shown you what we can show you about the products and such. I think that'd be all right. And that's a good place to leave it. So I'll say 77 degrees here in South Florida. And I'm going to go to lunch. Bye.
I'm going to Miami. Welcome to Miami.